good. This is Wednesday, 12th of December, for another Open Democracy podcast. I'm Tony Curzon-Price, and I'm very pleased today to be here at the British Library once again, this time with Antony Lerman. And Tony is frequent author on Open Democracy and has his own blog at Antony Lerman.com? Antony Lerman.com, and is and also has a Twitter handle, which I think is Antony Lerman. Is that right?
Tony Lerman.
Tony Lerman. Very complicated. Tony has he's written quite a lot on anti-Semitism, on Zionism, and one of the features of Tony's piece on Open Democracy is that they are some of the pieces that have attracted the most endless commentary and threads. Tony's has written a political memoir called The Making and Unmaking of a Zionist, a Personal and Political Journey, which is published by Pluto, and will be the basis of our conversation today. I have to say the photograph on the cover is of a completely utterly disarming and idealistic young 15-year-old, yourself, going off to a Zionist youth camp with a backpack and a cap. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful, and in a sense, it sort of also tells a lot of the story of the book, which is the story of boys and a young man utterly devoted to an ideal. That ideal slowly morphing and through various stages of disillusionment, but then ending up at the political place where you are today, which we'll describe in a moment. The story has the front cover has this great hope. One of the things that the book takes us through is not only the disillusionment, but also the way in which your story and your story of disillusionment became a political football in the last, you say the last 10 years. Actually, there are traces of this throughout the book. So the book, to me, works on three levels. There's the level at which it's about Israel, it's about Palestine, and those, let's say, real political problems. There's the background to the book is certain ideas of politics. Then there's a whole layer of the book, and actually in some sense most of it, which is the politics of an idea, not the idea of politics, but the way in which a particular idea or ideas of a complex of Zionism, of anti-Semitism, of Jewish identity, how they become politically formed, and that there's absolutely fascinating micro-history and of micro-conflicts of how those ideas get formed. And then there's the very personal story of how your own political life spans all those. Just to, I think for readers maybe, be good to start off with the background, your view today of the background conflict, of the Israel-Palestine conflict, and what do you think needs to be done?
Right, starting right at the end of the book, in a sense, to sort of jump straight in, I would say that we are now at a very depressing time for anyone who is interested and wants passionately a just peace for Israelis and Palestinians in the Israel-Palestine conflict. And whilst I was at one time a strong supporter of the two-state solution, I was very keen in 1993 when the Oslo Accords were reached, and I thought that was going to be the answer to everything. But as time has gone by, I've seen that idea be destroyed, but also seen the weaknesses in it. And we're now at a situation where I think that there is very, very little likelihood of a just two-state solution coming into being. In other words, the possibility of a fully independent, contiguous Palestinian state able to determine its own future, the possibility of that happening now seems to be almost completely gone. And what you have is a virtual one-state solution. It's not even a solution, it's a one-state reality where Israel, the Israeli government, the Israeli authorities, in effect control the whole of, not the whole of Mandate Palestine, but certainly Israel-Palestine from the Mediterranean to the Jordan and from the north into to the Red Sea. And I don't see how anything internationally can be done now to pull Israel back from that kind of control. And although I myself, around about 2004, I think it was 2005, had reached a kind of principal conclusion or a theoretical conclusion that the best solution for Jews and Palestinians, for Israelis and Palestinians, was for there to be one single democratic state in which belonged to all its citizens and which was not ethnocentrically based and would require Israel to repeal its law of return and recognize the right of return of Palestinian refugees. I came to that conclusion at that time, but very soon afterwards realized that actually debates about that kind of thing are really moot, because the only way it could be arrived at would be on a voluntary basis. I never thought that such a solution could be imposed. It was, in fact, the particular talk I gave at the time when I spoke about that idea. I spoke about it being an eventual evolution to that situation, which would actually mean you'd probably have to get to it by having two states first of all, and then those two states freely agreeing to make some kind of one state. You
quote, in fact, I'll just read this quote. I think it's a very interesting piece, and this this was at a talk which plays into the story later, that at a public meeting of Jews for Justice for Human Rights,
the Jewish Forum for
Justice and Human Rights. A lot of acronyms. You write there, which I think was 2005. You wrote,
yes.
"I'm convinced that peace and reconciliation will only come when Israel realizes that the ethnocentric path, the path of ethno-religious homogeneity, which can only be followed at the expense of human rights and universal values, is the wrong one. It's a realization that the Palestinians must reach too. But it's not something that can be achieved simultaneously or negotiated to occur at the same time. Israel must begin its own journey beyond Zionism. There is nothing to wait for."
Yeah.
So you have this, the image that you have is actually that there's a kind of a deep problem actually on both sides of this conflict, which has got to do with the particular nationalist ideologies that they instantiate, and that has to be taken apart, and that once that's taken apart, then a just solution is possible.
Yes, although as I say in that paragraph, the primary responsibility for that rests on Israel itself, because Israel, being the powerful military state that it is, there is no equivalence really between the situation of the Palestinians and the Israelis. They are in control, they have the power, and their nationalism rules. Their nationalism actually trumps Palestinian nationalism. So one of the things that happened to me over the years as I became more and more disillusioned about nationalism in general, so I would like there to be no nationalism, in a kind of ideal world. However, the fact is we've got it. Israel has got it in spades, and Palestinians need to be allowed to have their nationalism to the extent that they feel that they get self-determination. That will never properly happen, it seems to me, until Israel steps back from its ethnocentric path. And the problem today is that actually it's going the other way. and Israel, the forces of nationalism in Israel, which are moving in a fascist direction, in my view, are gaining strength as the months go by, and therefore the chance for the Palestinians to realize true self-determination is getting slimmer and slimmer, certainly in the sense in which it was conceived over the last 20, 30 years of a separate state for Palestinians, which would be equal to an Israeli state. So because you asked me at the beginning, my position now is that what looks to be the only hope to take these ideals forward is for actually the Palestinians to accept the fact that there's going to be this area which is controlled by Israel and fight for equal rights and civil rights within that framework. Because otherwise, it seems to me, there's simply going to be an oppressed minority, and I don't think that it's very much the international community will ever be able to do to alter that situation to become a state a bit like Russia or Singapore or something like that, where you have an authoritarian government, authoritarian system, with certain people inside it not having full rights, and there won't be anything that the international community can seriously do about it, because what it's shown up to now is that it hasn't been the one country which in theory should be able to push Israel in the direction that it needs to go, America, simply doesn't show any signs of being able to do that.
So what exactly is your critique of what one might call liberal Zionism, which advocates a two-state solution and thinks that actually two states can cooperate, should be able to cooperate and respectfully behave respectfully towards each other as states and protect their own citizens' human rights?
Right. Well, my critique of liberal Zionism is, on the one hand, it doesn't recognize the reality of the fact that the two-state solution is virtually dead. Right? When you talk to liberal Zionists, they insist that no, there is still a possibility, it still can be done.
And this is about the practicalities on the ground, given...
If you look at the practicalities on the ground, for example, just take the very fundamental point about two states, that the Palestinians should have their own capital in East Jerusalem. If you look at the map produced by an organization called Ir Am-Im, which means City of the Peoples. It's an NGO with Palestinians and Israelis on it. And you see the maps that they do. They monitor what is happening to settlement, Jewish settlement around Jerusalem. And you look at that map and you see actually where Jewish settlement already exists, Jewish areas where Jews live, and this thing that is now being threatened, the settling in the area of E1 that's in the news now. This is from a certain point in East Jerusalem eastwards to a large, basically, Jewish Israeli town called Ma'aleh Adumim. That's the government threatening to settle there too. The idea that the Palestinians could have an independent state, an independent capital in that area, just seems to me complete nonsense. So it seems to me that liberal Zionists are not looking at that are not recognizing that reality, and that's in a way why they're able to continue with the idea of a two-state solution. But secondly, they don't. I don't think they go far enough in recognizing Palestinian rights. And one of the key things is this business about the law about the right of return of Palestinian refugees. Now, I know that is very sensitive, it's very problematic for Jews, it's very problematic for Israel, because the idea is that the Palestinians will come in and flood and take over.
And become majoritarian.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is that when you speak to Palestinians, as I do, they don't want. They know that there is no question of the Palestinians just flooding back into. So, first of all, you'd just have a bloodbath. There's no way that the Israelis would accept it, and even if some government did, you'd have recidivists who would just wouldn't go quietly in that sense. So they understand that what's wanted is a recognition of the injustice done to them, recognition of that right, and then a negotiation, as I argue, should be under the framework of universal human rights. As to, okay, how do we now work this out? What does it actually mean? Compensation, perhaps some 20, 30, I don't know, 100, 200,000 may come back to their homes, that kind of thing. the mainstream Palestinians, I think, understand that. And my view is that the liberal Zionists, they won't go that far. They won't accept in any sense the Palestinian right of return. And I think that's something which I would like Jews in general and Jews who are sympathetic to Israel to realize they have to take that step.
And presumably, indeed, until the injustice is recognized, actually the basic grievance which fuels a polarizing nationalism will be there.
Exactly that. Again, from the people I speak, one person in particular, Karma Levolsi, who I think maybe she's written about democracy. Karma, who she was on the PNC, if I'm not mistaken, and close to Arafat and so on. She's somebody who's clearly she's Palestinian, she's got the interest of the Palestinian at heart. And when you speak to her about this, I think she's someone also who's got grassroots connect. I mean, she speaks to Palestinians on the ground. She's not one of these people driving around in expensive cars being funded by the EU, which is kind of accusation that sometimes put about what's happening to the Palestinian Authority. Yes, she lives here now, but she goes and she talks to people on the ground. They want a recognition of the injustice done to them. That people will finally say, and that Jews and Israelis will finally say, yes, what we did was wrong. They were wrong. They don't have to say everything was wrong,
or that there wasn't wrong done by Arab fighters, Palestinian fighters, etc.
Yeah, indeed. Yes. But that they have to accept that the 1948, the ethnic cleansing that went on in that did happen, and they should recognise that. Otherwise, without that kind of truth telling, as you say, there cannot be any real reconciliation between the two national councils.
So that's your current view. You're still an Israeli citizen. You're a subject, you're a British subject, an Israeli citizen. So let's go to a little bit of let's say intellectual history of your own history, because what's fascinating, one of the things that's fascinating in the book is the way in which you talk about the gradual dawning of the importance of the Palestinian view of things. And so you start off as as we said, first as a boy in the Labour Zionist youth movement, then as it becomes a central part of your life. You go to Israel, you join the kibbutz. At what point does so in other words, you start off in life as an idealist Zionist. At what point does that Palestinian view of things start to impinge on your ideals?
That's a very good question, because actually, although I began to question Zionism to a certain extent from a fairly early point after I went finally to live in Israel in 1972, and one of the key experiences that led me to begin that questioning was my experience in the army, where I encountered, I wouldn't call it anti-Palestinian, because still really we didn't talk about Palestinians at that time in the Zionist movement, but anti-Arab rhetoric that I encountered, and that led me to wonder what was going on here.
You have a very interesting, fascinating anecdote in which just before passing out, you're told that you're going to march through an occupied area, and you're given a gun, and you're told by the commanding officers are using language which shocks you.
Yes, it's shocked, because they told us that we have to be on our guard every minute just in case anything happens, and we had to have our guns. I actually had an Uzi, which is a submachine gun, cocked. So with live ammunition. And okay, that didn't so much surprise me, because obviously if you're a soldier is in effect enemy territory, but it was the language being used about the people that we would encounter that really was a deep shock for me. I hadn't heard anybody publicly say those kinds of things about Arabs, and which shows you how naive I was and how much I was living in a very kind of enclosed Jewish kibbutz kind of world where one didn't hardly encountered Arabs at all and so on. Because obviously those kinds of views were not uncommon in Israel at the time. It's just that I hadn't encountered them. And being in the army, I was more intent on being a good soldier, as I write in the book. And,
yes, at the same time as being shocked by this language, you're very proud at coming out top of your promotion.
That's right. So I didn't. My questioning of Zionism began then, and it was fairly slow, but did begin to gather pace. It wasn't really, I think. Since I'd have to go back to the book to check this, but I don't really think it was till the late 1990s that I really began to feel that I understood something of the Palestinian narrative, of the Palestinian experience. And it was only after, really, I think only after I left the Institute for Jewish Policy Research that I was director of, when I left in 1999 and was able to sort of think freely about these kinds of things, that I fairly soon, I think, came to the realization that I had to make a leap from just being critical of Zionism, critical of Jewish society, and sort of self-critical, like, and say, well, okay, that's important, but you have to absorb and understand and appreciate what the Palestinian story is, and be able to accept that they are not the other that should be hated, that the other you have to embrace, the story you have to embrace in order to be able to go forward with it. So it really was really late, really, I think, towards the end of the 90s that my thinking about Palestinians and my first encounters with Palestinians began, because up to that point I'd hardly met any anyway.
So, and in that, so in very potted terms, you leave, you do spend some time on kibbutz. You are critical of kibbutz ideology, but not for its not because of its Zionist elements. Let's say you find manual labor boring. You want to develop your mind. You're not quite sure about the idea that the family should be abandoned, that it should not be possible, that everything should be held in common, etc. So the socialism, let's say, takes a little bit of a knock. You return to the UK. And quite soon become involved in Jewish community life in terms of in various think tanks. You do so a lot of the book is writing. Quite early on, in the 1980s, you come up against this question which dominates the next 30 years. Of the relationship between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and actually, tell us very briefly that story of. So you have there's a first controversy which flares up when you, as editor of the Jewish Quarterly, published something on Bund socialism.
Yes, this was in 1984, I think it was, or 84, 85, when I became, as you say, editor of the Jewish Quarterly magazine, which is a small magazine, but was the most important Jewish literary political magazine in the British Jewish community. It had some readership outside as well, and rather innocently, I wrote an editorial called "The Politics of Anti-Semitism," and at the same time published in the magazine an article by a guy called David Rosenberg, who was one of the leaders of a group called the Jewish Socialist Group, which is kind of modern day, or modern then in the mid-80s, Bundist, I suppose neo-Bundist, you call it. Is that right? Because obviously the Bund was destroyed in the Holocaust. The Bund were socialist Jewish organisation that believed in a kind of Jewish nationalism, but sort of Jewish diasporism, nationalism, so that's where Jews should have.
So nation as in identity, but yes. Not nation as in state.
Indeed, and certainly not nation as in state, as in Zionist state. And I published an article about that here, and I for both things, I found myself coming under heavy attack and severe criticism by various leadership organizations within the Jewish community, the Board of Deputies of British Jews, which is formerly the official representative body of British Jewry, also the Zionist Federation, Zionist organizations, both for publishing this piece by David Rosenberg, because they regarded the Jewish Socialist group as totally beyond the pale, as something which was should be outside of the Jewish community, because it was putting forward an idea which was against Zionism, and Zionism is also the consensus of the whole community. So I came under attack for that, but I particularly came under attack for this editorial, in which I said that even back then, there were Jews and Jewish organizations were using anti-Semitism to explain anti-Zionism in a way that seemed to me to be unjustified. And I was doing that from that time from a Zionist position, because I was saying, actually, you don't have to say that the Arab position to Israel is anti-Semitic. You can use good Zionist arguments and good political and other kinds of arguments to explain what they're doing and to argue against, and that this reaching for the simple critique or answer and say, well, basically they hate us and that's what there is to it, is wrong, doesn't help us as the Jewish community, and certainly simply isn't the right way to deal with this issue. And again, the very fact that I questioned Jewish communal policy on anti-Semitism got me into a great deal of trouble, because there was a feeling that, again, I was actually working at the time for a Jewish communal organization. It was a little bit outside in the sense that it was the research arm of the World Jewish Congress, which is a wide political body, but it was based in the UK and it had a role within the Jewish community, and this was seen to be beyond the pale. Again, I, writing from inside a Jewish communal organization, critiquing the policy on anti-Semitism was just not acceptable.
So, this becomes a recurrent theme of the positions that you take really from then on. To some extent, of course. So you are an Israeli citizen. You were an Israeli citizen then, and one feels that you've always felt that both in your Zionist and post-Zionist position, you've always felt that it's absolutely not only right, but it's an obligation to be a frank, honest critic of Israeli policy when it deserves criticism. And what seems to have landed you in trouble time and again is precisely that you've been the kind of critic that Israeli policy has within Israel, but you've done that outside Israel as also a diaspora Jew, and so that you've in a sense broken rank. You've done this in public outside Israel and in fora which are visible to the rest of the world to see. So do you accept that there are these different, let's say, different institutional positions which you have, which you feel have given you this duty to be a critic, and which your critics feel that you've simply been disloyal?
Absolutely. And although in a sense that whole nexus which you described very well, I didn't really fully understand it till later on, when because there was a period after that episode with the Jewish Quarterly and the editorial and the article on the Bund, when I felt I had to keep quiet. I wanted to speak out, but I had my fingers burnt. I almost lost my job as a result of it. And I actually, for a period, I then actually focused on other things, not so much on the Zionism. It was all still bubbling in my head. I was concentrating more on anti-Semitism and on things to do with internal matters within the Jewish community, the development of the Jewish community. But you're absolutely right in the sense that what I came to understand was that the worst traitor, as it were, is the one who is at the heart of the Jewish community. Someone who is at the heart of the Jewish community and who says these kinds of things and has the kind of credentials that I have, being an Israeli citizen, that someone saying that is far, far more dangerous to the Jewish community, how the leadership saw it, than someone who is in some kind of fringe left-wing organisation on the edge. Yes, they were also dissed, they were also criticised, and the Jewish community, in many respects, would have liked them just to go away, but it was easier to marginalise them. It's much harder to marginalise somebody who is at the centre, who's running a major Jewish organisation, and who's actually doing practical things which were important to the Jewish community, in terms of social research and all kinds of other things. I finally tweaked only when I came under attack later on in the 2000s.
We'll get on to that, but I think before we get on to that, let's stick also to some of the some of the political ideas that you go through in the book. I think, in a general sense, I think the book is really fascinating account of nationalism. You have a remarkable quote you start one of your chapters, Shedding Illusions, quote by Martin Buber, which I'm just going to read out, which it seems to me actually, in a sense, tells the story of your change of heart. Buber, writing in 1921, says, "A nationalist development can have two possible consequences. Either a healthy reaction will set in that will overcome the danger heralded by nationalism, and also nationalism itself, which has now fulfilled its purpose. Or nationalism will establish itself as a permanent principle. In other words, it will exceed its function, pass beyond its proper bounds, and with overemphasized consciousness, displace the spontaneous life of the nation. Unless some force arises to oppose this process, it may well be the beginning of the downfall of the people, a downfall dyed in the colours of nationalism."
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely...
It's a wonderful quote.
It's a wonderful quote. And just, it seems to me that this is that the process that Buber has in mind is very much the process that you describe. In other words, a nationalism which Buber seems to suggest that nationalism has a purpose at some point in the development of an identity of a people, etc. I'm not sure whether you still think that, but it may or may not be the case. But what Buber describes is a nationalism which becomes an end in itself.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that what you believe has happened to the idealistic Zionism which you espoused as a young man?
Yes, I think that is exactly what's happened to it. That Zionism has become a ceaseless project. It's simply ongoing. That the Zionism that dominates in Israel today and dominates it. I can't say it dominates in Jewish communities worldwide, because actually the opinions of Jews on Israel and Zionism are actually much more nuanced and more questioning than that. But nevertheless, in leaderships of Jewish communities around the world, there's a lot of support for if not the most extreme nationalist Zionism in Israel, at least ready to sort of give it space to continue. And I like the phrase that Eliot uses about literature, isn't it? That purifying the tribe, and basically what Zionism has become this constant project to purify the tribe, because what's happening is that the Zionism, which when I grew up, and I know that there was a lot of illusion here, but we saw it as socialistic. We saw it about equality, because we didn't know about Palestinians, and we should have known. But just putting that aside for the moment, those were the ideals that we had of equality and accepting difference and those kind of things. Well, the Zionist nationalism today, Messianic religious Zionism, is moving down the direction of rejecting the other, saying that the other doesn't have rights, that needs to be discriminated against, basically caged in certain kinds of areas where only where Jews won't go, and those that other the Palestinian Israeli, they can't settle in certain Jewish areas. So indeed, I think Buber has it exactly right there, that this is incredibly. He wrote this
1921,
and I think he's incredibly prophetic. Now, you know, whether his conclusion there, downfall of the people, happens or not, I'm not. He's more of a visionary than I am, and I wouldn't know. But certainly, it's certainly a downfall of anything that I understand as being to do with Jewish values, and even the values of what was clearly a flawed ideology, Zionism, but you know, did in its earlier days, and I think even many anti-Zionists recognize this, and I don't call myself an anti-Zionist, I call myself a non-Zionist. Even many anti-Zionists recognize this. Actually, had they have been in 1920 in Germany or in Austria and France, you know, they could understand the appeal of Zionism. They could see why that could be a solution, accepting the fact that, of course, it was, as we know now, it was a colonialist project, and it didn't see the Arab as equal, and it didn't recognize Palestinian rights, things like that. But nevertheless, I mean, most nationalisms seems to me do develop as a kind of not in isolation, but they develop because people feel overgeneralizing here, but you know, certain people feel that they are oppressed, and that the answer to their oppression is to come together in nationalist one, and where they can, because you know, they are living in an area which they feel is their own, to assert their identity there. Of course, the one thing about Jewish nationalism is that the Jews weren't living there. There were a few, always some Jews living in Palestine, but actually who elsewhere, and they have to go. So I think this is that expresses my feelings very well.
This ends part 1 of my conversation with Antony Lerman. Parts 2 and 3 to follow.